Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Kol Neshama. We learn one parak a day of Mishnayos. Today's shir is Louis Nishmas Aaron Nachman ben Simcha HaKohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Baruch Sarah Bashmol Leib, Binyamin Moshe ben Yosef, May Neshamas have Aliyah, and Refuah Shlema for Ada Sarah Bas Leah. And today we're learning Perek Gimel Maseches Peah, Mishnayos Peah. And here we go. Today's parak is the continuation of yesterday's parak, where we spoke about the importance of where the I'm a different angle today. We're talking about the different conditions and variations of whether you give one payah for the field or two payahs. Is it considered one field? Is it two fields? So it's a continuation of that topic. So Mishnah Aleph starts off Malbinos Hatuash ben Hazesim, that if squares of grain were planted between olive trees, a square meaning it was like a brick mold. There was this mold, it was a mold that was used for shaping bricks, and it's also used to like a patch of grain where where you cultivated that patch in the shape of a square. So you planted the grain in the spaces between the olive trees so that grain can grow in separate patches. You want to maximize space in the field, and you have the trees and the space between the trees. So you're planting grain between the trees to maximize space. Beishamai Amin Peah Mikol Echad Echad. Beishamai says you give a peah from each and every one of the squares because each of them is considered a field. Each space between the trees is considered to be another field. That's a chumrah. Excuse me. Beis Hillel omrim miachar ala kol. Okay, something in my throat. Beis Hillel omrim miachar ala kol. Beis Hillel say he may leave payah from one square for all of them. You get payah once, and that's good for all those square patches amongst the trees. Um, so it's interesting because Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are it sounds like they're arguing, but in reality, they're only arguing on a little tiny detail because both of them agree that when a farmer purposely separates his grain into distinct patches that could have easily been combined, that each patch is considered to be a separate field. And they both agree that when it's impractical for him to make the them continuous because the trees are so closely spaced, then it doesn't then it's not considered. There's no indication that he wanted them to be separate, and therefore they considered one field. But they're arguing in a very limited case where the space between each tree is 18 and a quarter amos, which is which in a field that is 50 by 50 amos, they're spaced out to that dimension. So Beis Shammai says that would be a case of widely spaced trees, and therefore you would give a payah on each and every section. The Beis Hillel says that it's considered closely spaced, and they would give one payah for all. But if the trees were more than 18 and a quarter amos apart, then Beis Hillel would agree that you give that he would agree with Beis Shammai that you would give one payah on each, and if it's less than 18 and a quarter amos, then Beis Shammai would agree with Beis Hillel that they're considered one, and you only give one payah for all. That's according to the Bartanura. It's not just regarding. It's also not just regarding the olive trees. It's also regarding fields of other trees. But the Mishnah is zooming in on the olive trees to teach that even olive trees have their own obligations when it comes to payah. Continuing the Mishnah with Mishnah Aleph Modin Shim Hayu Rosh Shuros Moravim, that the Shammai agree that if the edges of the rows were connected, meaning that each of the squares was connected at some point to the square next to it, Shahud Noshim Peah Mi'achad Alachad, then then he may give Peah from one square for all of it, since they're all connected in some little way, that they are considered to be one single field, and give one Peah for everything. Moving on, Mishnah Beis, Hamanamer, sorry, Esadehu V'Shiyer Kalachim Lachim. So if someone harvests his field in patches, meaning that not everything's ready to be cut at once, so he first starts off by cutting all the ripened stalks of grain, excuse me, and then leaves the patches of, and it leaves the unripe or the moist stalks like still standing. Just cutting them down in sections. Rabbi Akiva Omer, notice the Peah Mi'achad, Mikol Echad Echad. Rabbi Akiva says you have to give Peah by each and every one of the patches, because each harvest is considered to be a separate field. And if you do it multiple times, Chachamim Omer Echad Alakal. But the Chachamim say you can leave a Peah from one patch for all of them, because it's considered to be one total harvest. It's just that these are not ready to be harvested yet, and you're going to do them in when they're ready, but it's considered to be one harvest. Modim Chachamim Rabbi Akiva B'Zoreya Sheves or Chadal B'Shlosha Mikama Shu Nosim Peah Mikol Echad Echad. And the Chachamim, they agree with Rabbi Akiva that when one planted dill or mustard in, there's some gears that say 2 or 3 places in the field. Mishnah only said 3, but the other gears that say 2 or 3. That if they planted these in 2 or 3 places in the field, that he should know saying Peah Mikol Echad Echad. Then he has to give a separate Peah for each and every one of those places, because since the crops are generally planted in patches rather than in a continuous stretch, each one is considered separate. So, I mean, but this doesn't seem to do anything. This seems to be not have anything to do with the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, and therefore it's unclear why it says that over here that the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Akiva. Typically, vegetables do not have Peah because they do not stay in storage. That was one of the conditions that we mentioned in Perek Aleph, that they had to be able to be stored, and vegetables are not, they're not stored. They spoil fast. Therefore, they're not obligated. But the seeds which do stay in storage, they do store for long. They are obligated to be in Peah, whereas the vegetables themselves are not chayav in Peah. So we'll talk about the seeds over here. Mishnah Gimel, moving on. Amachlik b'tsalim lachim b'shuk b'mekayim yaveshim legorim. So what if you harvest? You intentionally harvest your crop in 2 stages. First, you're plucking out the moist onions of the crop for the marketplace. These are the ones that are ready to be sold, and you keep the dry runs in the ground to be harvested for storage, because they're not ready to be sold yet, because they're being done in 2 stages. Therefore, in 2 stages. No stain Peah the elu la'asv the elu asv. So therefore, since he's harvesting them to be separated in the 2 stages, he gives Peah for each and every stage. Being that the ones that are going to the marketplace are going to be do a Peah for those, and the ones that are going to be for storage are going to get another Peah for those. The same applies to a crop of chickpeas, and the same applies to a vineyard. If he harvests his chickpeas or grapes in stages, as we explained, that they are considered to be two varieties, and each requires its own payout. Hamedel, Hamedel, no semin hamshuar al mashashir. The machlik, the achas yad, no stain min hamshuar al hakol. If one thins out his onion crop, in order to make room for the remaining onions to grow, because sometimes when you pluck some out, then the rest will grow better. So when he later harvests the entire crop, he gives a peah for what is left, from what is left for what he was growing. I mean that only the ones that were left growing require peah, not there's no pay required for the ones that he plucked out of the field in order to help the other crop grow, because those onions were not harvested, but rather they were plucked, and you only have to give payah on what was harvested. Okay, but if he plucks out the moist onions and later the dry ones for one purpose, being being you know as we explained earlier, I mean, either they were off the market or they're off for storage. So notice that, so then he gives payer for what was left in the ground to dry for all the crops, even though he's plucking some out for to make them grow better. Since they're all going to storage or they're going to the marketplace, he's going to give payer on everything, not just the stuff that remained over there. Moving on to Mishnah Daled. These program are getting a little bit longer, so I'm trying to keep to the 30 minutes. The ideal ballpark of 25 to 30 minutes. So I hope I'm not going too fast. Hayimahos shel b'tsalim chayavos b'peyam. So mother onions are obligated in payah. What is a mother onion? Mother onions are onions that are kept in the ground to produce seeds. And since they are left in the ground for so long, they are hardly edible. So we learned before in Mishnah Aleph, sorry, Perek Aleph, that things that are not edible are not chayiv in peah. We spoke about like woad, because only in emergencies it's not a normal type of food. However, over here, since they might be mother onions and they might be tough to eat, but they're still onions. They still belong to the onion crop, and onions are regularly, and therefore they are chayiv and peah. But Rabbi Yossi says they're not chayiv and peah because at the end of the day they're only eaten in an emergency and they're not meant to be eaten on a regular basis. Therefore, he potters it. Ma'abonos habit salam sheben hayarek. If squares of onions, as we started off with the chapter with, were planted between patches of vegetables. So before we spoke about squares of grain that were planted between the trees. Now you get the same shape, the same patch size, but they're onions, and they were planted between patches of vegetables, so that the vegetable patches intervene between one square of onions and the next. Rabbi Yossi says, Peah mikol echad v'echad. So he says that you give a separate peah from each and every square, because it's not so common to do it like this. You don't consider vegetables to be part of the onion fields, and therefore they are considered separate patches, and you have to give them separately. The Chachamim Omen, the echad alakol. The Chachamim say you could give peah from one square for all of them. Mishnah Hey Ha'achim Shechalku Nosnin Shtei Peyos. Now you have two brothers. This doesn't happen so often in the history of the world, but every now and then you have a couple brothers that get into an argument. and they both inherited um, real estate fields. And the brothers, these two brothers, they divided a field that they inherited into two sections. So they have to give their own payers each from his half of the field. If they made up and they joined together for business purposes or tax purposes, whatever, then they can give one payer for the whole field. It's considered one field and not considered two fields. It's one rishus, not two. It's one business, it's not two. Therefore, they can give one payer instead of giving two, and they'll save themselves some of the expenses. Shnayim shelachu es ilan nostin peya achas. If two people bought a type of tree that is chayv and peya, then they give one peya for the whole tree. They're partners. They could do one peya for the tree. But if this one bought the north side of the tree and the other one bought the south side of the tree, the same tree, the one side belongs to A, the other side belongs to B. And this then they each give their own pair for themselves. Whoever has the first part of the tree gives a pair for his half, and the other one gives a pair for the other half of the tree, because they're not working together. If someone sells the individual tree sprouts full of fruit within his field without selling the land, he's selling the actual tree sprout but not the actual land, notice they pay and the buyer gives a separate pair for each and every one of the tree sprouts. Why is this? Because there isn't a limit between them, therefore they're each considered to be a separate field. Rabbi Yehuda Amasai, so here it says, when is this? When does this take effect? It's only when the owner of the field did not leave over any tree sprouts for himself. They sold them all to the buyer. But if the owner of the field left over tree sprouts for himself, who knows then pay the then he gives one pay at the end for the whole field of tree sprouts, even for the ones that he sold. I apologize for the background noise. There was a bris in the shul today, and there's still some remnants of the people. Usually it's quieter here, so I hope this doesn't interfere so much. And there's no door here to close, so I'll have to be done in a minute. That thought. Okay, they left the building. Baruch Hashem, it's quieter here. So this continuing with Mishnah this now we're talking about. We have 5 opinions how large a field must be in order to be obligated in Peah. Rabbi Lezer says karka base rova chayeves Peah. Rabbi Lezer says that land that's large enough for planting a quarter kav of seeds, a quarter kav is the volume of about 6 eggs. It's about 10.5 amos by 10 amos. It's called a base rova, which is a quarter kav. So a land area that's that large, like 6 eggs, it doesn't sound like it's that much. 6 eggs, how much is that? Is obligated in Peah. If it's smaller than that, it's not obligated in Peah. As we learned in earlier, that Peah must come from your field. So, the passage that we had at the beginning of has to become from your field. Peah sadecha. Right. So basically saying that a base rova is between different sections of the field, and that would be that point of Ezra, that would be chayiv peah. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ha'oses Sasayin. Rabbi Yeshua says even land that produces only two saws of seed is obligated in peah. So a saw is 6 calves, so two saws is 12 calves, and so that's larger. That is larger. Um, 1 second. We said this higher mathematics over there. We said a quarter cob is 6 eggs, and a saw is 6 calves. So a cob holds 24 eggs, and therefore a saw is 6 calves. So that's the equivalent of 24, 48, 90, 48, 96. That's so. Oh my gosh. So, so two saws is 12 cups. 12 cups. Um, okay, so that seems to be larger. Sorry for the delay. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Shisha al Shisha Tvachim. Rabbi Tarfon says that 6 by 6 Tvachim is obligated on Peah, and which seems to be more than two saws. Two, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kedei Likser Lishnos. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says even the land that produces only enough to reap 1 fistful of produce and repeat it is obligated in produce. So 1 fistful is very, very small, because he says that each act of harvesting is a minimum of 1 fistful, because you're gathering it with your hands. Therefore, after you reap the first fistful, you are not to reap the second and final fistful. And the halacha follows his opinion. It's interesting that we don't usually see the Mishnah ruling the halacha, and then this wasn't really the halacha, and it was put here as not really the passing halacha. Um, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Karka Koshu Chayos B'Peah. Rabbi Akiva says that land of any size is obligated in pay, even the smallest amount. So how is it possible to give pay from the smallest from the smallest amount? So if it's large enough for only one stalk of grain, then since the stalk begins to harvest and the stalk has several grains, several ears of grain on them, and therefore you can, when you start cutting off one of the ears of grain, and then the other ear can be left for peah. Okay, the bikurim, and in bikurim also has a very small shear in order to be in bikurim. Yes, it also has to be your bikurim. And bikurim only comes from the shear seminim, so you're talking about wheat and barley as the grains that it comes from, and therefore you would give a very small amount if you had a very small size to give from. And lichtov ale prusbul, and to write a prusbul on the basis of it, that by the prusbul, the what's a prusbul? Where lenders, they don't want to lose their money during shmita, so the chachamim Hillel, the Chazakin, instituted that they should write up a prusbul where they can hand over the documents to the court in order to collect them even after the shmita. And so even the smallest plot of land can fit can in theory be priced at the value of the loan. Liknos iman nechasim she'en lahem achrayas b'kesef b'shtar v'chazaka, and to acquire along with it movable property through money, a deed, and an act of chazaka. These are all different things that can be done with even the smallest amount of land. And according to the Chachamim who were in the earlier part of this Mishnah. Moving on, it's getting late. Mishnah Zayin, Akosev Nechasav Shchiv Merah. So now we're talking about other topics, not necessarily about Peah, but other laws that are good enough with any amount of land. That's not a huge amount of land, it's even a small amount of land. These next two Mishnayos are going to talk about that issue. So if someone writes over his property to others while he is gravely ill, and he didn't specify that he was doing so because he felt that his tira was near, shiyer karka koshahu matanasa matana. So if he left over for himself any amount of land, his gift or of the property to someone else is a valid gift, even if he recovers. Lo shiyer karka koshahu. But if he did not leave over even the slightest thing for himself, he gave everything in Yerusha to his next of kin or to someone else, then his gift is not a valid gift if he recovers. Because his leaving nothing for himself indicated that he was expecting to pass away soon, and therefore, since he recovered, his gift is void. But if he left even one thing over for himself, then he wasn't expected to die anytime soon, therefore his gift would be valid. Hakosev nechasav levanov v'chasav the ishto karka koshahu. So if someone who is lying seriously ill writes over his property to his children, to his sons, and he writes over to his wife any amount of land, and she remains silent in the face of this distribution of his property, Ivdak Subasa. She thereby forfeits her right to collect her ksuba from properties that were assigned to the sons. Rabbi Yossi Omer in Kibla Aleha Afal Gav Shelo Kasubla, but if she accepts upon herself to take a portion of the estate together with the sons, even if the husband did not write anything over to her, she thereby forfeits her ksuba payment because she agreed to the idea of being included among them, and therefore she doesn't get her ksuba. But if she refused, then she'll still get paid off her ksuba. And Mishnah Ches, finally, Hakosev nechasav va'avdo yatsa ben chor. Someone writes over all of his property to his Evet Kanani, he's about to pass away, and he gives everything to his Evet Kanani, then the Evet Kanani goes free. Because since the Evet Kanani is also property, belongs to him, so therefore by giving everything to his slave, then he's giving his slave freedom as well. Shiyer karka koshahu lo yatsa ben chor. But if the master is wording the document, if he leaves over for himself any amount of land, even the smallest amount, then the Eved does not go free because he's tied to the land. Rabbi Shimon Omer the Olam hu ben chor. Rabbi Shimon argues and says that in all cases of the master leaving some land out of the gift, the slave still goes free. We do not say that since he left over some, according to Shimon, that since the master left over some land for himself, we don't say that he meant to include the slave as part of, we don't say that one more time. Shimon holds that we do not say that since he left over some land for himself, perhaps he did not mean to include the slave as part of the gift. Therefore, he it's assumed that the slave was included and the slave goes free. Ad Shiyamar, until he says, Hare kol nechasai, the sunan ish ploni avdi chutz mi echem meriba shabam, except where the master instructs that all my property shall be given to so and so, my slave, except for 1/10,000th of a very small amount. In that case, Rishon Rabbi, the slave does not go free, since the unspecified 1/10,000th part of it might indeed refer to the slave himself. I once heard a story of of a uh, of a master who only a slave was by his bedside when he was passing away, and he really wanted to give something to his kids, but the slave pretty much like twisted his arm, um, and he didn't know what to do. So what did he do? He wrote a letter to his son, and he gave it to the slave to deliver. And inside the letter, it says that I hereby give my entire fortune to my slave. However, my son can choose one thing, only one thing that he wants to keep from the entire estate, and he can keep one thing, and everything else goes to the slave. And so the slave went to the son. He was all very happy that he's getting everything to one item to the son, and the son is heartbroken. He doesn't know what to do, so he runs to the Gadol Ador. I forget who it was at the time, and the Gadol Ador is studying this letter, and he's like, "Your father was a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant man, because he knew that he would never that if he gave everything to you directly, that the slave would make something up and cause trouble. So he wrote this in a very, very special way, and he said the one thing that the son should take from the possessions of the father is he should take the slave himself, because we have a rule that Masha Kana Evet Kana Rabo, that what belongs to the slave belongs to the master, and therefore if he takes the slave as his possession, therefore he gets everything from the slave which really belonged to his father, and he secures his father's Yerusha for himself and the maintains everything. And the slave was not too happy to hear that, but that was the psak halacha from the Gadol Ador, and their father was really brilliant for that move. On that note, have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.